or spur could induce him to set foot upon a piece of boggy land, and to give me confidence, one of the ranchman's sons said, "Wherever I've killed a rattlesnake from him, he'll shy for years," and went on to cite localities where a sudden, violent lurch had nearly sent him over Canello's head. What greater recommendation could I wish? If the old horse had had any wayward impulses left, his Mexican bit would have subdued them. It would be impossible to use such an iron in the mouth of an Eastern horse. They say the Mexicans sometimes break horses' jaws with it. From the middle of the bit, a flat bar of iron, 3/4 of an inch wide, extended back 4 inches, lying on the horse's tongue or sticking into the roof of his mouth, according to the use of the curb. There was no other rein. The bit alone weighed 16 ounces. The bridle, which came from Ensenada in Lower California, then the seat of a great gold excitement, was made of braided rawhide. It was all handwork. There was not a buckle about it. The leather quirt at the end of the reins was the only whip necessary. When I left the ranch, the bridle was presented to me, and it now hangs behind my study door, a proud trophy of my Western life, and one that is looked upon with mingled admiration and horror by Eastern horsemen. Canello and I soon became the best of friends. I found in him a valuable second, for, as I had anticipated, the birds were used to grazing horses, and were much less suspicious of an equestrian than a foot passenger, and he found in me a movable stake, constantly leading him to new grazing ground. For when there was a nest to watch, I simply hung the bridle over the pommel and let him eat, so getting free hands for opera glass and notebook. To be sure, there were slight causes of difference between us. He liked to watch birds in the high alfalfa under the sycamores, but when it came to standing still where the hot sun beat down through the brush and there was nothing to eat, his interest in ornithology flagged perceptibly. Then he sometimes carried the role of grazing horse too far, marching off to a fresh clump of grass out of sight of my nest at the most interesting moment, or when I was intently gazing through my glass at a rare bird, he would sometimes give a sudden kick at a horsefly, bobbing the glass out of range just as I was making out the character of the wing bars. From the ranch house, encircled by live oaks, the valley widened out and was covered with orchards and vineyards, enclosed by the low brush-grown ridges of the coast mountains. It was a veritable paradise for the indolent field student. With so much insect-producing verdure, birds were everywhere at all times. There were no long hours to sit waiting on a camp-stool, and only here and there a tree-top to sky the wandering birds. The only difficulty was to choose your intimates. Canello and I had our regular beat, down past the blooming quince and apricot orchard, along the brush-covered side of the valley where the migrants flocked, around the circle through a great vineyard in the middle of the valley, past a pond where the feathered settlers gathered to bathe, and so back home to the oaks again. I liked to start out in the freshness of the morning, when the fog was breaking up into buff clouds over the mountains and drawing off in veils over the peaks. The brush we passed through was full of glistening spiders' webs, and in the open the grass was overlaid with disks of cobweb, flashing rainbow colors in the sun. As we loped gaily along down the curving road, a startled quail would call out, "Who are you, eh? Who are you, eh?" And another would cry, "Quit!" in sharp warning tones, while a pair would scud across the road like little hens, ahead of the horse, or perhaps a covey would start up and whir over the hillside. The sound of Canello's flying hooves would often rouse a long-eared jackrabbit, who with long leaps would go bounding over the flowers to disappear in the brush. The narrow road wound through the dense bushy undergrowth known as chaparral, and as Canello galloped round the sharp curves, I had to bend low under the sweeping branches, keeping alert for birds and animals, as well as Mexicans and Indians that we might meet. This corner of the valley was the mouth of Twin Oaks Canyon, and was a forest of brush alive with birds, and visited only by the children whose small schoolhouse stood beside the giant twin oak from which the valley post office was named. Flocks of migrating warblers were always to be found here. Flycatchers shot out at passing insects. Chewinks scratched among the dead leaves and flew up to sing in the branches. Insistent vireos cried, "To-whip, to-whip, to-whip, to-wee," coming out in sight for a moment only to go hunting back into the impenetrable chaparral. Lazuli buntings sang their musical round. Blue jays, blue squawkers as they are here called, went screaming harshly through the